What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're carrying on with the comparison between offensive security and defensive security. So today we're going to take an extensive look at defensive security after we have talked about offensive security. So what do we start first? So we start with the definition. So definition of defensive security is the act of preventing intrusions from occurring. So we have intrusions and cyber attacks. We want to prevent these from happening, and we want to detect them when they happen. So in defensive security, we actually aim to do two things. First, detect. Okay, we want to detect, and also we want to prevent. Alright, so what do we aim to detect and prevent? We aim to detect and prevent cyber attacks and, of course, intrusions. Plus intrusions. So that is the definition of defensive security. Now, some people ask, why don't we just prevent the attack, prevent the intrusion? Why do we care about alerting and generating alarms for the intrusion or the cyber attack? So basically, simply the answer to this question is that we want to know that the attack happened, right? We want to be alerted that an intrusion is taking place in the network. We just don't want the IDS or the IPS or whatever technology is being used to immediately prevent the threat and us not knowing about it, because you cannot always have visibility over everything what's happening, and you can always be alerted about it. So you need to first generate an alarm that an event is taking place, and you will have the option to prevent it, or you can keep it. Maybe you're running a testing network, or you're running a honeypot. So we need to know what's happening. We need to know that attack is taking place. That's why we actually detect it. We need to detect it, and then we prevent it. So that's defensive security. We detect and we prevent. Okay, so now what are the specialties and careers connected to defensive security? First, SOC stands for Security Operation Center. So in Security Operations Center, guys, what you do, or what is Security Operations Center? It's a team of cybersecurity professionals, security analysts, security engineers. These guys, they monitor the network and the systems connected to the network to, of course, as I said earlier, to detect cyber attacks, intrusions, and malicious activities. So now let's cover some areas of interest to the Security Operations Center and the team members. So what do they do? What do they do actually? What are the main areas of interest for a SOC team? So basically they try to uncover first vulnerabilities. So SOC analysts, SOC team, they regularly do vulnerability scans to make sure that the systems connected to the network are free of vulnerabilities, and whenever a vulnerability is discovered, they would actually seek to fix it or provide a proper patch and install a proper patch on an update. Now, when a fix isn't available for a vulnerability, like 0 days, so 0-day vulnerability, right? We talked about this. 0-day vulnerabilities. When a fix isn't available for these kind of vulnerabilities, the SOC analyst, they would recommend measures to be taken to prevent an attacker from exploiting this 0-day. Maybe some of the measures is totally shutting down the connected service. For example, let's talk about the Log4j. So the Log4j vulnerability, when it was first discovered, there wasn't any availability of a fix for this vulnerability. So what an effective, of course, SOC analyst would do, they would try to prevent the attack exposure or minimize the attack exposure of the Log4j. So what it means, they would try to install temporary patches. Maybe they would try to totally disable the library or the Java library connected to the log4j in an attempt to prevent this vulnerability from being exploitable. So if you don't have a patch for a vulnerability, what you would do, you would shut down the service, or you would just configure a temporary fix so that the vulnerability is not exploitable. Okay, so they would take care about vulnerabilities. They would take care also of policy violations. So policy violations. So policy violations, or policy, actually is defined as a set of rules. Anyone can define policies. Even on the level of your own personal computer, you can define policies in your Windows system to, for example, prevent certain applications from being executed, require certain applications administrator privilege to be installed, whatsoever. So these are called policies. We can define policies on the host level or on the network level using different programs and tools. So SOC analysts or the SOC center, they need to be actually alerted when a security policy is violated. For example, it might be a policy violation if users start uploading confidential information or confidential organization data to an online storage service, such as Google Drive. So what you would do, in certain case, you would install a service in your appliance called data loss prevention. So data loss prevention enables you to monitor the activity of the data traversing across the network. So basically, you give it certain attributes of the data, such as credit cards, OCC credit cards, yes. Also, social security numbers, right? Maybe something that is particular to your organization or to your settings. For example, you don't want PDF files, maybe PDF files to be uploaded to Google Drive. So we would add PDF files here. So whenever these attributes are detected traveling across the network in an outgoing way, okay, you will be alerted that PDF files are being uploaded, for example, to Google Drive. So this is an example of policy violation. Of course, policy violations are different per the organization. Every organization is different to what they consider a policy violation. Okay, so next, they would monitor for unauthorized activity. So what is unauthorized activity, by the way? So unauthorized activity is any kind of unexpected login whether from known users on your organization or from unknown users. This is called unauthorized activity, or a user trying to access files or services and not on their privilege level. For example, let's take an example. If user John, okay, is part of an Active Directory structure, and user John is trying to access admin files on the file server, okay, or maybe HR files. Now, in your organization or in your structure, you have configured the permissions so that only authorized people is able to access these files. So for example, John is from marketing, okay. Now John shouldn't be able to access admin files and HR files. When they try to access, the attempt would be reported, okay, through your through event log, and event logs normally is configured to travel to a SIEM device or a SIEM solution for analysis. So you would be also alerted about this unauthorized activity. And lastly, we would also in SOC team monitor for network intrusions. So even if we have all of the security tools in place to prevent cyber attacks and cyber intrusions, there is always a chance for an intrusion to happen. So when an intrusion happen, or an intrusion can occur when a user, for example, clicks on an email attachment, a link from untrusted source, or when attacker exploits a public server. So we call this a network intrusion. So also we want to be alerted about this. So these are the areas of interest for a SOC team or a SOC center. Okay, let's now remove all of this. We want now to explain the digital forensics part. Okay, so now in digital forensics is totally different from the SOC operations center. So if you work in digital forensics, you cannot work in SOC center, so you have to choose one of them. So digital forensics, we can define this as the act of analyzing evidence to extract facts. So now the evidence can be of various forms. A picture can be considered an evidence. Also, a disk copy can be considered an evidence. Of course, gathering an evidence, there is a methodology to gathering evidence, and sometimes if you, of course, actually not sometimes, always, if you don't stick to a defined methodology, your evidence would be not recognized or rendered inadmissible in the court. So in digital forensics, there is a methodology to be followed in gathering and analyzing evidence. So we need to, or we actually care about gathering evidence, analyzing evidence to establish facts or prove facts sometimes. The focus of digital forensics actually shifts always to analyzing evidence of an attack and its perpetrators. So in digital forensics, we want to uncover two items. We want to uncover the first, why the attack happened. Okay, I want to uncover facts about the perpetrators. So we need digital forensics to perform these two items. So what do we do in digital forensics? First, we analyze file system. So basically, the first thing we do, let's do one file system. So let's say that an endpoint on your network has been compromised, and you have discovered that the attack actually, or the attack originally has hit a Windows endpoint. So what you would do to perform digital forensics, you would take a copy of the disk or the file system. So we take a copy of the file system, so to analyze it later on different workstation or a forensically crafted, operating system, such as, I couldn't remember the name of that. It was RE. Maybe I will recall the name of the some of the distributions used for actually specifically used for digital forensics. But anyway, the first thing actually is to analyze file systems. Now, if you want to understand the process of digital forensics and all of its ramifications, I have created a note file called let's see here, incident response, logs, blue team notes. Yeah, so the blue team notes here, I have outlined summary of all of the steps you would take when you first respond to an incident or do digital forensics. These notes actually are taken from fieldwork I have done myself. I summarize them into a single note file if you are interested in digital forensics. So basically, as you can see, we saw the incident response, the phases of incident response. Now, most of the time, when you do incident response, you would also do forensics. Preparation, gathering details, how to conduct the investigation, scenarios when the machine is an endpoint and not a public-facing server, and when the machine infected is actually a public-facing server, what you would do and how to analyze it, how to gather the evidence so that your evidence is admissible in court. Okay, let's get back here. So first, we take a copy of the file system to analyze it further later. Now, what would actually a copy of the file system includes? Or what would it reveal? It reveals much information actually. It reveals what are the installed programs on the file system, the created files, modified files, the date, the deleted files, the encrypted files, everything that has to do with files is revealed when we take a copy of the file system, a bit by bit copy we call it. So certainly we do actually the clone, oh sorry, not the clone, sorry, we do the file system copy, we extract it or we take it using certain programs. Some of the names is actually DD for Linux. For Windows, there is FTK Imager. Also, there is Incase. There is Celebrite, which is a fantastic forensic software for mobile and PCs. These are some of the names. I'm sure you can find more names on the market if you do more research. So, file system, also memory. We want also to analyze memory. The reason is that sometimes the attacker is running their malicious program in memory without saving it to the disk. Certain viruses and malwares run only in memory without saving files to the disk, so that antiviruses won't be able to detect them. So that's why we also analyze memory. We take a forensic image bit by bit, low-level copy of the system memory, which is the best way to analyze the contents and learn about what happened. Now, some of the tools to analyze memory is volatility, it's best in class actually tool to extract a copy of the memory and also analyze it using various plugins the developer have made it. Thanks to these developers for their hard work. Okay, file system, system memory, and also to gather evidence, sometimes we need to take a look at the logs. You would also find answers in the logs, system logs, web server logs, any kind of logs, network logs. All of the communications between an endpoint and a server is maintained in the logs. Sometimes you would find traces in the logs. So logs cover system logs and network logs. How to gather these? You can gather them using something called the SIEM if you use one, or event logs in Windows. Also syslog in Linux. You can find these logs there. Alright, so that is the areas of interest in digital forensics. Okay, let's now talk about incident response. So incident response, sometimes it includes areas or steps you do normally while you conduct digital forensics. So let's first define incident response. An incident usually refers to a data breach or a cyber attack. Now, an incident is different from an event. So an incident is an actual incident actually first it is an event and then it escalates to an incident. An event is any kind of reported activity on your network. A user trying to log in, or a user that has logged in successfully or unsuccessfully. An incident is where this event turned into something abnormal or unusual, so that it escalates to a cyber attack, security violation, or whatever. In some cases, it can be something less critical, such as misconfiguration, intrusion attempt, or a policy violation, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so in incident response, we aim to detect these events, these incidents, and take the necessary steps to prevent them from happening. So what are the steps of incident response? The first we prep or preparation. So in the preparation phase, the team is required to be trained to handle incidents. We train the team on handling incident and cyber attacks. Ideally, various measures are put in place to prevent incidents from happening in the first place. So we prep the team using tools, resources, training, so that they are able to respond to incidents once they happen. Next step now is detection and analysis. So once an incident is detected on the network, okay, we move to the next step, detection and analysis. So the team here, We want to make sure that the team use the available resources, available tools to detect any incidents, and then they will analyze the incident. So when we detect an incident, first we use the tools, available resources, okay, and then we analyze it. Analyzing the incident includes understanding when it happened. So we want to know when it happened and how it happened, okay, and also where or what are the endpoints affected. So let's say what is impacted. We want to assess the level of damage of this cyber incident. So by knowing when the incident happened, okay, how it happened, and what is the level of damage, we are actually analyzing the incident. Now the third step is containment, eradication, and recovery. So containment, sometimes these steps are separated, okay, but I'm summing them here. Containment and then eradication and recovery. So once we have detected the incident and analyzed it, now it's time to contain the incident. Some examples of containment could be shutting down an internet access from the affected host or the affected endpoint, whether Windows, Linux, or it could be a public server. Now when the machine is public server, we try always to avoid cutting the internet from the public server, as it's used by clients and people from outside the network. But if it is inevitable, we need to do it. We need to contain the incident. All right. So next we have the eradication. So eradication, self-explanatory, is that we eradicate the infection. We perform the necessary steps so that the infection doesn't exist anymore. Some examples of eradication include maybe we do a complete antivirus scan, maybe we do a complete format and re-imaging of the system. These are some examples of eradication. And of course, recovery. We make sure that the system is back to normal. So some examples of recovery could be restoring a backup or a safe backup, where we know that at that time of the backup, where we took the backup, we know that the system was actually working correctly and there were no infections. And the last step, of course, is lessons learned. We sit down at this stage, we analyzed what we have done earlier in the previous steps, so that we take notes and lessons about what happened, so that also that the incident won't happen again. Okay, so now we talked about SOC, digital forensics, incident response. Now let's talk about threat intelligence. So threat intelligence, it's not a new field. It's actually something that that has been used a long time ago, because it's actually a methodology more than being a field of study. So threat intelligence is actually gathering information about a threat. So we aim to gather data. We need data, okay, to form decision to be taken against a threat. In terms of cybersecurity and defensive security, in threat intelligence, we gather information about what? About threats. Normally, the threats are the attackers. Okay, so we gather information about the attackers so that we prevent attacks or cyber attacks from happening. But how do we do that? First, we take a look at two data sources. The first thing is maybe you can take a look at recent cyber attacks. Including attacks that hit your network or other people's network, and you can take a look public sources. So what do you find? What do we find there? We find information about the attack, what industry the attack has hit, and the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Example of gathering intelligence data is using the MITRE framework that we have talked about many times. So in MITRE framework, there are very useful insights about the attacker's techniques, tactics, and procedures, what is the industry per attack, and also you would find classification about the attackers. It would classify the attackers groups into specific categories and classifications. So in threat intelligence, we aim to classify attackers, know about their tactics, techniques, and procedures, so that we use all of this data in our own network to prevent similar attacks from happening. That is simply the definition of threat intelligence. As all of you know, guys, learning about your adversaries allow you to know their tactics. So as a result of threat intelligence, we can identify the threat actor, the adversary or the attacker, predict their activity by processing the data we have found, and consequently, of course, we will be able to mitigate their attacks and prepare a response strategy. Okay, now lastly, let's talk about malware analysis. This is all part of defensive security. Okay, so malware analysis now. What is malware? So malware actually is a word that stands for malicious software. Malicious software. Any software, any program, any tool that is designed to corrupt a data or a computer system. It can be also a document. All right. So what are the classifications of malicious software? There are certain classifications most of you heard about. So the first thing is virus. And also you have worm, Trojan horse, and lastly ransomware. Sometimes we also mention rootkits. These are the common types of malicious software, or anything that falls into malicious software. So virus, the first thing is virus. The virus is a piece of code or a program that attaches itself to certain binary or program. For example, viruses most of the time are designed to spread from one computer to another. They work by altering, overwriting, and deleting files once it infects a computer. The result ranges from the computer becoming slow to unusable. So if your computer is slow, apart from not properly using the computer, because not all the time when the computer is slow it means that you have a virus. Sometimes really people cannot use their computers properly, which render their computer acting slow or sluggish. But there are other times really when the computer is infected with a virus. That's why it's slow. So it's worth investigating when your computer is performing slow, or the performance is slow than usual. So virus, because one of the implications of being infected with a virus is the computer being slow and sluggish. The worm is similar to the virus in that it's quickly spreading to other computers on the network. That's the worm. The Trojan horse. Now, Trojan horse is a program that shows one desirable function but hides a malicious function underneath. Let's take an example. A victim might download a video player or document from, say, an untrusted website or a shady website that gives the attacker complete control over the system. Now, Trojans, if written professionally or crafted professionally, they can go undetected, and they can turn into something called rootkits. The rootkits hide in system files and processes, so you cannot detect them. It's very hard to detect rootkits. The ransomware is a malicious program also, or malware, that encrypts users' files in demand for a ransom to be paid. Most of you know what is ransomware, I would think. Okay, now we know the different kinds of malicious software, but how do we analyze it? So analyzing malware is actually two steps or two processes. The first one is called static analysis. The next one is dynamic. So what do we do in static analysis and what do we do in dynamic analysis? In static analysis, we analyze the file without opening it. Okay. Maybe we are working in a trusted environment and we don't want the virus or the malicious software infecting the network, so we don't open it. We keep it closed. We analyze the file statically or using static methods. So what do we need to analyze the file using static analysis? So we need certain programs. There are certain programs to analyze the binary using static methods, such as using hex editors. You can use hex editors to analyze static files, static binaries. You can also use assembly language, or let me say debuggers. Sometimes they call it disassemblers. So in order to perform static analysis for malicious files using debuggers or disassembly, you would need certain level of assembly knowledge or assembly language knowledge, which is the processor language, to perform static analysis. Sometimes you can be good with using only certain programs without using assembly. For example, you would analyze the PE. There are certain programs called PE analyzers. So PE analysis is the process of analyzing the portable executable file, analyzing the header, analyzing the functions, the imports, the library. You can do that without disassembling the file or debugging the file to reveal the certain source code. Now, what are examples of debuggers or disassemblers? In Linux, you have Radar 2, and also you have IDA. You can use these programs to perform disassembly on the code. That is static analysis. Now, what is dynamic analysis? Dynamic analysis is the process of analyzing the file while it is open. So why do we do that? It's actually more effective to dynamically analyze the file or the program, since it allows you to view what is actually the program is doing. So we can view what the files that are created by the malware. We can view the network connections. We can view the registry keys it is modifying or creating. We can view a wealth and plenty of information while the file is open. Of course, we need certain tools to dynamically analyze malware. Some of the tools, you can find them using Microsoft sysinternals. There are many tools there to dynamically analyze malware. Alright, so now we talked about the specialties and careers in the defensive security. Let's now talk about the skill areas. So what do we need? What are the skills we need to actually, let me remove these first to be able to properly talk. Okay, so what are the skills needed to excel in defensive security? The first thing you would need to know how to work on IDS IPS appliances. What are examples of IDS IPS? We mentioned actually earlier or in the recent video. First, we have Snort. Snort isn't an appliance. It just can be installed on any device, on any computer, or any endpoint. It can be considered as IDS IPS. Also, we have Wazoo. Wazoo is an HIDS. HIDS is Host Intrusion Detection System. A host intrusion detection system operates on the host level, not on the network level. Snort can be both either NIDS or HIDS. NIDS is a network IDS, operates on the network level. Okay, what are example of appliances that can be used as IDS IPS? Some example appliances we have Palo Alto. Palo Alto originally is a firewall but can be used as an IDS. Also Cisco SA. Cisco Firepower. These are a couple examples. I'm sure we can find a lot more if you do extra research on the internet. You can just go on the internet, research example of IPS IDS appliances, and then you can install them on your own environment to be able to learn them properly. Alright, so you need to also to work on firewalls. So firewalls, as you know, they allow and block connections from and to a specific network based on rules. Now firewalls can also be installed on the host level or network level, to operate on network level depending on your settings. Example firewalls can be also Cisco SA. Palo Alto is also a firewall. Windows also Windows Firewall. You have Windows Firewall, IP tables, UFW for Linux. We talked about these in the last video. Also, you need certain level of networking. You cannot work in SOC team or in incident response if you do not know, or even digital forensics, if you don't know networking. You need to be very skilled and knowledgeable in networking, especially the Uzi model or TCP IP. I recommend, if you want to get started in networking, to take the CompTIA Network Plus certifications or CCNA from Cisco. This will get you started in networking and equip you with the required knowledge to start in one of these fields. SIEM. Now SIEM stands for Security Information Event Management. These tools can gather logs from various sources, including event logs, Windows event logs, sys logs, web server logs, all the endpoints and other log sources. It can gather the logs and store them in one interface so that you can process and analyze logs from one place. Example of SIEM is Splunk. Okay, assembly and C programming. Obviously, you would need assembly to effectively analyze malwares. So you cannot claim you are a malware analyst if you don't know how to perform static analysis using assembly. I mean, I haven't heard of someone who works in malware analysis and they can only perform dynamic analysis. I mean, it can happen maybe one out of 100, right? But you need assembly and also C programming. Sometimes you would need to take a look at the C code and analyze it properly while doing static analysis. Forensic programs. Now, apart from being well versed in forensics, the concepts, the methodology, and the foundations, you also need proper training on forensic programs. Example of forensic programs is we have FTK, we have Incase, we have Autopsy, we have DD in Linux, Volatility for memory forensics, and many more. OSs. So when I say you need to be skilled in OSs, it means you need to be knowledgeable and able to actually perform deep dive into the file system in both Linux and Windows, and the registry in Windows. You need to be able to work with these comfortably, because it's required from you to be able to analyze, most often to analyze file systems in Windows or Linux, or go over the registry keys in Windows while you're performing mostly digital forensics, sometimes incident response. So guys, that was it for defensive security. Now I hope you guys liked the video. You can also get back to the previous one where I talked about offensive security, and by now you have proper understanding of both offensive and defensive security. I hope you guys like that, and I will definitely see you in the next video.